Oh mon Dieu. Bonjour mes amis. Aujourd'hui, je voudrais présenter mon collègue, une pouf célèbre Renault Savoya. Ce soir, nous parlerons de l'amour de Renault pour les balles. Okay, so now that we have all the Frenchies on board with what's going on, let's get into it. So today I have a very special guest on the show. We have had a love-hate relationship for the past decade or so, or more. I don't remember when this started. I don't remember why it started, but it did. And you know, a highlight over the years is, for example, he once said this. Also, I do remember once, I think it was in Thailand, so maybe World's warm up or something. I remember I was taking him out in practice.
I think it's 50-50.
I took him out like 2 or 3 times in practice. And they had this berm also where I could like block, supercross block past him and take him out. I remember that. Those are maybe 2 highlights from over the years. I've told also some stories from our encounters over the years on the podcast. But anyway, we're adults. We can deal with it. Actually, we are very similar. We speak our minds. A lot of people think we're dicks. And some people, you know, may think we're okay. But that's probably the issue. We are both opinionated, stubborn. We're like, we know what we want. We say what we want. We don't give a shit kind of people. So, hey, perfect for this video. Because on this video, we will discuss something that I realized a number of years ago. And I started this running joke, which is that Renault loves balls. I've done this numerous times.
Savoya told me that he's only going for balls now. He loves balls. He's all about balls. 100% balls out for the rest of his career. Savoya Renault, I'm just calling because I don't know if you saw, but LMR released some brake balls. So I know how you like balls, so I just figured I'd let you know. Black balls and red balls. Yeah, I know, Renault. I mean, I love you too. Yeah, and I miss you.
So the thing, why does Renault love balls? The thing is that he has had his best results in RC when he has been racing pillow ball cars. So hence the balls reference. So Renault really needs balls in his life to do well. And he is kind of sad, depressed, miserable when he doesn't have balls in his life. So this is sort of an intervention of sorts, because it's been a number of years now where Renault has been ballless. And as a result, I think his career is basically over. He's done. As a professional RC driver, he's done. But there is some hope. You see, I wrote this book, Invisible Speed, about car setup. And one thing that I wanted to figure out was, what is the actual difference between pillow ball cars and C-Hub cars? Why do they work differently? I need to find out. I really need to figure this thing out. So that's what I did. And now, since we've had this, you know, long-term relationship with Renault, then I think it's only right that I intervene. So this is an intervention in Savoya's racing career. We are going to try and figure out how to make the KYOSHO MP10 work for him. So, does it need balls, or is there another way to get Renault what he needs? Let's go talk to the man himself. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, the point of this video is to figure out why you need balls in your life so bad. That's basically it.
So that's the
And
subject, right? It's been going on
Yes.
for a while now, so we need to
Yes,
think about it.
I'll just explain where I'm coming from, because this is obviously a long-running joke that Savoya loves balls. And the reason is that my argument is that unless you get balls in your life, then you're done as an RC racer. And obviously, I mean, everyone by now should know when I say balls, I mean pivot balls. So your best results in RC have come when you race a pivot ball car. If let's think back now, take it easy. Don't get excited. I know you're all KYOSHO'd out and you have C hubs, but just listen to my theory. It's pretty watertight. You raced for Mugen, you had pillow balls. You won 3 straight European championships. Am I correct?
Sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Then
Right.
you were third at the World Championships. So you were going strong. Then you parted ways with Mugen and you went to Durango. Now, that was a bit of a disaster. So it wasn't just the balls there. There was a lot of issues. You went to HB. Was HB after?
X-ray first.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So you went to X-ray, started off, nothing great, but then something happened, and this strengthens my case because X-ray gave you what you needed. They were Renault. We know you're a triple European champion, and you haven't really been doing that well, but we're going to give you balls. And X-ray gave you balls, and immediately you started having success. I think your best result was second place at the European Championships. And I mean, basically, you were fighting for the win. You could have won that race. So you were right
I was
there.
in the lead. I crashed maybe once too much, and that's why
Yeah,
I lost the lead. But I was in the lead at that European Championships. Yeah.
Yes, Ronefalk pitted after accident, but Savoya keeps the lead, and that's Ronefalk. So Savoya and Ronefalk have both taken their stops. Savoya just ahead of Ronefalk.
Yeah, but it was like this comeback of Savoya, like, what the hell? He's back. And I knew, most people didn't, but I knew why. It was the balls. Then fast forward, after X-ray, you went HB. You didn't really manage to repeat that kind of success. It was okay, but not the same. And after HB, you went TLR.
TLR, yep.
Right?
Yep.
And I would argue that towards the end of TLR, you started doing better. Do you agree?
No, that's true. I mean,
with the HX,
by the time I got used to the car, honestly, since I figured out the 4.0, I felt a lot more competitive. I think the 4.0 was a really good car. And then after we managed to make the 8X the car it is now, I think I had a lot of success with the car also, being fourth at the Euros. I was fighting for second before I got taken out.
Yeah, so. You actually, the Euros in Italy, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's 2018.
So there was one moment, it was such a crazy main. So there was one moment when I can't remember now if it was raining or it had just stopped raining. I think when it was raining, that you were the fastest and you were catching everyone. And we were like, I was with Mao in the stands. I'm like, you know what? Renault's going to win this shit. So we were cheering, but then I think it stopped raining.
It stopped raining.
The advantage you had went away. And then some other drivers became the fastest. So it was like, had it just kept raining, I think you would have won. So anyway, so you started doing better with TLR again. Now you switched to KYOSHO. And to be honest, with KYOSHO, we don't really know what you can achieve because of COVID. We haven't really seen you race the KYOSHO yet properly.
Yeah, like I said, we didn't have so many races this year, but the 2 big events I've been to was the 3 big events I've been to was Montpellier Grand Prix, Padova, of course, but it was the first race, and Buggyland. Montpellier, I was fighting for TQ. I lost the overall TQ for 0.2 of a second, so I was really into the pace, and the track condition changed for the main, so I think we were not in the right window for the tire and compound combination that we were running. So that's why I was not that competitive in the main. I got fifth. I was just behind Elliott. Also, I had some issue with some traffic. So the podium was just right there. So for me, I felt really competitive in Montpellier. And the other,
where did you finish?
Race, I got fifth.
Fifth, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And the other race was Buggyland. I was fighting for TQ also with Canas. I TQ round 2, and I was super close from TQing the overall in round 3. So it's another big race with higher European level, and I think it was 2 shots where I could feel like I was able to TQ a run, and at that level, it didn't happen for 5 years maybe. So
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay. Um, so yes, so there's some potential there with the KYOSHO. And I
Of
guess
course.
at the end of this video, we are going to figure out how you can simulate some balls with the KYOSHO. How can we get as close to that performance that you have with the pillow ball cars? How can we do that on the KYOSHO? So for that, we need to understand the difference between the pillow ball designs and the C-Hub designs. So that's what we're gonna go through. But first, before we do that, I think it's important to understand how you like to drive. So your driving style, how do you enter corners? How do you drive through corners, accelerate? What are you doing? Brake, throttle, steering? Can you explain that, please?
I think it's hard to analyze your own driving. I think it's maybe easier to like take out and be trackside and see you driving sometimes. That's why I like to watch videos of me driving. But what I like, um, it feels like from an outside point of view, I'm a pretty aggressive driver. But when I drive, I like when the car is pretty numb and at least not that aggressive around neutral. But I like to have a ton of steering. Um, it's what I want. I want the car to have a lot of rotation also, but I want it to be stable at off power. I don't want to lose the rear end that much at high speed. So I like the car to be stable, but I feel the fastest I am, the more steering I will have.
So would you say that when you say that you are aggressive, that typically you like to have pretty big movements on the steering, for example, like you just want to throw the car into the corner. You don't want to sort of carefully turn the wheel. You want to be
Yeah,
able to just turn it.
yes, that's my feeling. Like I'm pretty smooth on the throttle, on the gas. That's why sometimes I have one of the best mileage out there. I think I'm pretty smooth, but on the steering, yeah, I like to play a lot with the wheel.
Okay. That
I give
actually
you a point
makes
now.
really good sense, and this strengthens my argument even more. Thanks a lot for that. So, aggressive on steering, smooth on throttle. That's what you would say
Yeah.
that you are. And when you drive, is there some sort of typical mistake or problem? Not necessarily problem, but something that you notice, like, okay, I need to fix this in my driving so I can be faster. Especially on a new track, you tend to notice these things. So, is there something that's typical to you?
My mechanic Manu always tells me that is like I sometimes like go in too early. Like I and I from the videos I've seen, it's like many times I go in too early, then I counter steer and then steer again. That's maybe one of the things. Like okay, I feel like I didn't reach the breaking point yet, but I'm already steering.
Okay, so turning in too early and then
Yeah.
not being able to maintain the corner
That
speed through the
corner speed,
corner.
which I like because it's always finding the proper momentum from front to rear and having that weight transfer. And if you're like braking and going in too early, you have to do it again, and then you're losing all the momentum. So
Yeah. Okay, so then let's say that you didn't turn in too early, you turned in right, you're in the corner. What do you do? Like, do you want to typically get on the gas super early, or how do you like to do
yes,
that?
yes, my engine is never really at idle. Actually, I like to like give some gas and give some gas into the corner.
Okay, so there's very little coasting, really. You aren't some drivers, like for example Bruno, who I spoke to before, he said that he likes to sort of brake before the corner, then turn off power, do the corner off power, and then get on power. But you aren't like that. Then you just want to throw it in, and as soon as you can, get on power again.
Yes.
Okay, this is really good. This is looking really good for my theory here. Okay, so next thing, if we talk about what you want from the car, so I mean, you already covered it a bit, but if we just focus on the car now, so not your driver input, but what kind of characteristics do you want from the car? For example, the steering into the corner, mid corner exit, and on power, off power. Can you explain that?
Yeah, like I said, I like the car to just that I can go on the wheel, like not so much initial steering. Um, but I like when the car it follows what I want to do in the corner, like to have a real balanced front and rear. It's like the rear not being just too stuck on the ground, waiting for the front to steer. I like when the rear follow the front really good, like so I can feel I can go on power. Because if I'm mid corner, I feel that my car is pushing already. I'm not gonna go on power at that moment, and I like when I feel that the rear end is a little bit loose at that time mid corner, so I can already go on the gas and the car is gonna like finish the curve, having some rotation from the rear.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of what I expected actually, and just the overall feeling of the car. So when you say that you have rotation from the rear when you get on gas, do you mean to the extent that the car sort of feels loose when you drive it, or do you still want it to feel in control? It just has good steering on power.
For me, it has to feel in control and stable, because I always say when the rear end is loose, you can't really feel comfortable with your car, and it's even more obvious when you're like fighting with all the guys on the track. I mean, if you have a car that feels loose in the back, um, it's gonna be all right. You can do a super good time when you're like 5 minutes by yourself on the track. But as soon as you put other cars around here, first you have maybe different lines, and second you can't really fight with the other guys out there. So it has to be manageable and easy to drive still.
Okay, so you don't like it if it's loose and sliding around, but you need it to still rotate and be able to sort of drift. You don't want it locked in.
Yeah, no, for sure not.
Okay, okay. So, I mean, I already know that I'm right at this point. Let's drink to that. But honestly, how good you have some drink too. Honestly, I
It's too
can't.
early for a beer.
It's too early for me to know what the solution for you is other than balls at this point. But your explanations make perfect sense in my mind, so that's good. We have some video also of you driving, but I want to talk about that after we've gone over the difference between balls and no balls,
Mhm.
because then it will make more sense. And I mean, the best thing about having you on this video where we discuss this difference is you've driven all these different cars. So you've driven the C-Hub cars and you've driven the pillow ball cars. So now, in your words, how do you feel, or how do you see the difference between the two designs?
To go back on that subject, I think it's also like talking about all the success I had back in the days and everything. I think also the track changed a lot from that time to now, and maybe the cars did like need different things. But I checked some videos from 2007, for example, the other day, and I I was watching the lead. And I said, how is it possible to be in the lead, like crashing that much, or being that unprecise? I think every driver now is better than 10 years ago. I mean, that's the feeling I have. Like right now, I feel I'm a better driver than 10 years ago. Um, so I think the level is a lot higher now than what it was in the past. So I think the drivers are better. The cars, they move forward, but maybe not as much as the drivers, in my opinion. Um, to go back on that, I think what was the question already?
And the question was that the difference between the pillow ball
Oh yeah,
cars
yeah,
and in the C-Hub cars in how they handle.
yeah. I feel like with the C Hub car, you have overall the feeling that the car has more steering, but it would be more off power steering, less on power steering. Uh, Pivot ball seems a little bit easier to drive, more forgiving in bumpy conditions also. Um, and I think you have more weight transfer from front to rear with a pivot ball steering, because you have those angles with kingpins and everything, which is like transferring some weight when you go on power, for example, with the wheel being that angled. And yeah, I think the steering is different from you go high speed and low speed on the pivot ball. And I think it's more consistent steering from low speed to high speed on the C hub.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with that description. How does it change your driving though? So do you feel that you need to change the way you drive with the two different designs?
I don't know. Honestly, back in the days when, I was working with X-rays, we had three different solutions. We had the TLR systems that came out in the XB9, XB, no, 808. And then they had the XB8 first edition C hubs, and then they were making the pivot ball steerings. So before the Euros in 2012 or 2013, I think it was, I went to the track in Reims and I tested all three solutions. Um, I didn't feel I was changing my driving style, adapting to like from one to another. I felt like from lap one, I already have the feeling of what's going on, and I could like just drive around. But in those three conditions, I felt like okay for the car, the way it was at that time, it was the best balance front and rear was with the pivot ball. I think it's always finding the proper balance. I know that Ty also, when he signed with X-Ray, he wanted the C hub for sure because for him it was the C hub that was better. So they came out with this car with two systems in the box, the C hub and the pivot ball. And finally, all the X-Ray guys are using the pivot ball. So I think it's just finding the proper front rear balance of the car. Many cars have pivot ball for like forever. Some other cars have C hubs forever, so they're just making the rear end matching the front end, and the balance is the way it is now. You can't change like going to a pivot ball one day with keeping the same rear end. I think that's what I've been through with TLR. They were like try to understand what's going on the Mugen cars or the C hub, the pivot ball cars, and okay, what's going on front and rear, and figuring out what they should do on the front steering system. But I think if you're a good driver, you are not thinking about adapting your driving style. It's just natural. It's like turning the wheels in the air. Sometimes I've been listening to like young crying babies drivers and say, oh, my car's not doing this, my car is not doing that. I mean, it's maybe because I'm an old driver, but you can't really have the perfect car always. You probably know yourself. I mean, from your own driver experience, how many times did you feel your car was perfect on the track?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, it's not that often.
So for me, it would be the same with, from going to C hub to pivot ball and everything. I mean, there's not so many times that you feel, oh, dude, that's the car I want. That's I'm feeling super pumped about it. I mean, it happened to me many times this year, and I didn't have that feeling for a while. So, I think it's about adapting the setup also, maybe around the steering system more than the driving style.
I've prepared a bit of an explanation for what I think the difference is between the two, and we'll go over that now. And then after that, we'll watch some video of you driving, and we'll come up with a setup for the KYOSHO that will suit you. How about that?
Nice.
So now I'm gonna explain to you how I understand pillow ball or pivot ball or PBS or just ball suspension versus the C-hub suspension, and how the front and rear end of the car work together. And I'm going to do that by looking at your typical C-hub car, the KYOSHO, and then your typical pivot ball car, the Mugen. And then I'll talk about some exceptions to the rule, like the TLR and the Sworkz. This is truly science mode now. So Keenan, you can just tune out. You're not going to understand this anyway. But everyone else, please watch this. Maybe you'll learn something new. Okay, so we have to start here with some theory. This is a picture of a C-hub from the front. You have the knuckle here. This is a plastic C-hub in this case and kingpins. And if you view this from the front, then it will look like this. This is the kingpin axis, or the steering axis. The knuckle turns around this axis. And this longer blue line here, this is the center line of the tire. Now, what we actually, this is a bit simplified now, because what we are actually looking at is the center point of the contact patch. So the contact area of the tire on the ground, the center part of that, that's where we calculate that the force is applied. So we are now imagining, in everything that I'm explaining now, we imagine that there's zero camber, equal load on the tire, and the contact patch is the center of the contact patch is the center of the wheel and tire itself. So just the disclaimer there for any like super nerds out there who want to catch me out. The center point of the tread is outside of the steering axis. So this red line here, this is what we call the scrub radius. So the scrub radius is the difference between the steering axis intersecting the ground and the center point of the contact patch, where, at the ground. And this is basically a moment arm. So what I mean is that all the forces that are created between the contact patch and the ground, they will twist the knuckle around the steering axis. And the larger this scrub radius is, the larger the force is that tries to twist the knuckle. I'll show you here with an actual knuckle. I want this to be really 100% clear to everyone. So here you can see that at zero camber, the kingpin axis, steering axis, is also at zero, so it's vertical. So any sort of force to the outside of that here turns the knuckle. Now, if I go in line, perfectly in line with the kingpin, and I push, nothing happens. I can't turn the knuckle. If I go outwards, boom, it turns immediately. That's because I created a moment arm between the steering axis and the location of the force. That's why I can turn it. Okay, so back to the image here. The moment arm is the scrub radius. In this case, it's called a positive scrub radius because the center point of the wheel, in this case, and contact patch, is to the outside of the steering axis. Okay, so why is this relevant to the question of how does C-hub work versus pivot ball? And that's because with your typical pivot ball suspension, the scrub radius is actually the opposite. So let's look at this case. Now, this is actually a C-hub design, and that's because I prefer the C-hub design because it's very adjustable. You can achieve many different types of front end with a C-hub, whereas you're very limited with the pivot ball suspension. So I'll show you here. So with the Mugen, they have two balls here. Instead of kingpins creating an axis for a knuckle to turn around, they have these two balls. So the upper ball and the lower ball. And if we had a good picture from the front, which I don't, you would see that these are at an angle. So there's some inclination to these balls here. And that is the steering axis. And that's what you can see here in this image. So you can imagine that this is a pivot ball suspension, and here is the upper ball, and here is the lower ball. And then this is the plastic knuckle. It works the exact same way as this. So anyway, in this case, we have again the center line of the tire or the contact patch, and then the kingpin axis or steering axis is now inclined. So it intersects the ground to the outside of the center point of the contact patch. So now this scrub radius is called negative. So it's actually working in the opposite way to the previous example. I'll show you this now on an actual C-hub. Here you can see that the steering axis is actually inclined. So at zero camber, you see that the steering axis has some inclination to it. And what this does is that now on the other one, if I pushed here in line with the steering axis, the knuckle wouldn't turn. But now it's moved that point further out. So even if I go out here and push, nothing happens. I have to go really far out on the knuckle for it to turn when I push on it. So what does this mean? So the positive scrub radius, the contact patch center point is to the outside of the steering axis. This is typical on C-hub cars like the KYOSHO. It has this. Negative scrub radius. This is typical on pivot ball cars, and I made a C-hub design like this. The intersection point of the steering axis is to the outside of the center point of the contact patch. This will make sense to you if we look at what happens from above. This is now the view of a KYOSHO from above, and here we have the steering axis and the center line of the tire. Now imagine that you were to accelerate with a KYOSHO. So the front wheels start turning and they start pulling the chassis forward. So what happens is this tire will start moving forward and it's pulling this car with it. So it will want to tow in. Now on the other side, of course, same thing. So both front tires want to tow in because the force on the tire is occurring to the outside of the steering axis. This is the point that the knuckle is turning around. So when the tires want to go forward, they start twisting into tow in. Now if we look at the Mugen, what happens here is this is the intersection point of the steering axis and it's to the outside of the contact patch center line. So what happens in this example is when you accelerate, this tire will want to twist around this point. So when you accelerate, the front tires are going to tow out. Okay, so let's just pause here and think about this for a moment. What does this mean for the car? Well, this means that when you get on power with a KYOSHO, the front end will actually want to turn the car. Now, you may wonder, like, what are you talking about? Tow in is normally more grip, like how can that be more steering? Well, it's because of this. So imagine this car now is turning left on power. And as it turns left, what happens? More weight will transfer, or more load will transfer onto this outside tire. And as more load is transferring onto this outside tire, and it's turned left already, this force is trying to turn it even more. So the outside tire actually wants to turn the car even more. This is why you have a slight this is why the front end of a C-hub car wants to turn the car on power. If we look at the Mugen, and let's go look at the same tire here. So we imagine again that the Mugen is turning left on power. So the load transfers onto the outside tire here. And this outside tire is trying to tow out. So the car is turning left, but this outside tire, when you're on power and accelerating on power, it's wanting to turn the other direction. It doesn't want to go left. It wants to go right. So these twisting forces affect how these two different cars perform on power. So the KYOSHO front end wants to turn more on power, and the Mugen front end wants to turn less on power. Hopefully that's clear so far. Now, what happens then when you brake? So when you brake, I think maybe some of you already guessed. So you brake, this tire wants to tow out. And same, of course, on the other side. So when you brake with a KYOSHO, the front tires want to tow out. And that could be a bit of an unstable situation then. Because like this is similar to the rear end, how toe in makes it stable. That's why we run toe in on the rear. Well, same for the front under braking. If you had toe in, it would make the car more stable, want to brake straight more. When it toes out, the car might start wanting to wander to one side or the other. Then on the Mugen, we have the opposite, of course. So when you brake, this is going to happen. So the tires want to toe in under braking. So the Mugen should be more stable. The front end of the Mugen should be more stable under braking than on a C-Hub car. Okay, so this is the first part of the puzzle. And to be honest with you, when I first sort of started studying the difference between pillow ball and C-Hub, I was so sure that this is the key. This makes all the difference. The inclination on the front, the way the tire camber changes when the wheel turns, like the obvious things that you can see. But as I continued and as I made my own parts for my car and I made sort of pivot ball geometry on my C-Hub and drove, I realized that, okay, I haven't really figured out what's going on. And I knew that I needed to look at the rear end in more detail. I needed to understand what was going on because that was the key. And indeed it was. So next we have to look at the rear end. On the rear end, we have to start here. On the rear we don't have steering. So there's no steering axis, but there is offset. And offset does create a moment arm too. So this is your sort of typical KYOSHO rear end. Well, KYOSHO actually has a lot more offset than in this image here, but the idea is that this is the point that the hinge pin, the outer hinge pin on the rear arm, attaches to the hub. And then in the KYOSHO typical C-Hub car example, again, the center point of the contact patch is to the outside of that hinge pin. Now, I didn't actually find an official term for this, but I call this negative offset in this direction. Then a Mugen style rear hub. Again, this is the point at which the hub attaches to the arm. So this is where the hinge pin goes. And then here, the center point of the contact patch is to the inside of the hinge pin. And then this distance here, this would be the moment arm in this case. So if we go here, we can see, okay, so on the KYOSHO, this is the hinge pin. And then to the outside of that, you have the center point of the contact patch. This is where the forces act on the tire. So again, when you accelerate, what happens? This tire wants to toe in. So same on the other side. And then, you guessed it, when you brake, they want to toe out. So again, we have a situation where, so on the KYOSHO car, when you get on power, the rear end grips really well. Because the tires themselves want to toe in. They want to toe in and keep the car going straight. They don't want to allow the rear end to slide. And then when you brake, well, it's not quite as stable then, because when you brake, the tires want to toe out, and you know that less toe in on the rear means that it's less stable. And then if we look at the Mugen, we have the opposite scenario. So the hinge pin is to the outside of the contact patch center. So when you accelerate, the tires want to toe out. And then when you brake, they want to toe in. So what does this mean then? Well, it's the opposite to the C-Hub situation. When you get on power, the rear tires want to toe out. So this is actually the key to how the pillow ball car works. So let's go back a bit. A pillow ball car is typically relatively neutral, smooth going into a corner. And then the steering increases slightly mid-corner. But then when you get on power in the corner, the front end pushes a bit. So the front tires, as explained earlier, they want to toe out. And this is why the pillow ball cars are so good in sort of high grip situations, fast, let's say fast sweepers, and especially if they're rough, bumpy sweepers, because the front tire, outside tire, doesn't want to turn the car more or catch anything. It just wants to sort of toe out, and it sort of aids the car in sliding over the bumps and not catching them and flipping the car over. But everyone knows that sort of mid-corner, when you get on power, the pillow ball car will suddenly turn more. It will rotate more. So, like I said before, I thought it was the front end. It's not. It's the rear end. The rear end actually wants to turn the car more because the rear tires want to toe out. So if you imagine same scenario now, and this car is turning left, so more load is transferred onto the outside tire, and the outside tire wants to toe out, it's aiding the car in rotation. So the rear end doesn't want to grip and stay straight like on the C-Hub car. It actually wants to help turn the car. So it's not as simple as saying that a C-Hub car drives this way, a pillow ball car drives that way, because you need to combine the front end with a rear end, and then you know how the car will drive. This is how I would describe the handling of a C-Hub car. The front end is dominant. So that front end has a very powerful role in the handling of the car, because the front end is quite responsive. So the steering is aggressive and responsive, and you have great off-power steering. So as you brake to go into a corner, the front tires already toe out, so it's a bit unstable left to right. Then you let off the brake, you turn in. The front end has good grip. It has good initial grip, good side bite, so it turns the car into the corner. But also, the rear end actually also, because of the offset, has good initial grip, good side bite. So the car will turn into the corner with grip, front and rear. Then, so you navigate the corner, and as you accelerate out, what happens is that the car pushes slightly. And it pushes slightly because the rear is gripping, because the front is actually turning the car. So out of the corner, the front is predominantly turning the car. But you have to remember, as you accelerate, load moves off the front tires onto the rear tires. So when you're accelerating, the rear is the rear has more grip potential because there's more load on it. And the front tires are kind of light. But the front tires are the ones that are trying to turn the car more. So that's why you have a slight push when you exit the corner on a C-Hub car. So it feels kind of neutral and easy because of that. So front end dominant, good initial responsive steering. So good off-power steering. And then when you get on power, car pushes a bit. So typically what people do is they adjust the front end first. So if they need more steering or they need less steering, they need more on-power, off-power steering, less on-power, off-power steering, they'll focus on the front end of the car and try and fix it by adjusting the front. Okay, so same explanation, but let's add the rear to that. So like I said already, good entry grip. What happens then when you get into the corner? We didn't talk about that yet, because I think that the rear end is more important here. If you drive within the capability of the capacity of the car, within the sort of working range of the car, of the setup, then what happens is after that initial grip going into the corner, you'll lose some grip mid-corner. So the car will rotate mid-corner. And then when you get on the power again, the rear end will grip again. So if you are sliding slightly and you get on the power, the rear end will stop sliding, grip, and drive the car out. But if you get this wrong, so if you are too aggressive, what happens is initially you turn in, the front end turns the car in, the rear end is gripping, and then mid-corner the rear end loses some grip, you could spin out. So this is a typical problem actually on difficult, tricky tracks, and when a driver goes to a new track and isn't quite sure of the speed to carry in a corner. On C-Hub cars, you tend to see people spin out because of this reason. So that's the balance that you're looking for on a C-Hub type car. So the rear end is set to be stable with good grip mid-corner. That's what you're really looking for from the rear end. So you want it to have good grip mid-corner so you don't spin out. And you normally only really adjust the rear end if you can't get the desired result from adjusting the front end first. So you set the rear end to have good grip always, and then you are mainly adjusting the front to get more steering or less steering or something like that. And if you can't achieve that, then you adjust the rear. Then if we compare to pivot ball cars, it's a bit different. So here I would say that the front end is numb. Initial steering is not so much. So the off power steering is sort of average. And then as you slow down and you are mid-corner, you have a slight increase in mid-corner steering. Now, it's because of the front and the rear, but let's focus on the front first. So the front turns the car a bit more mid-corner. Then when you get on power, then it pushes again. So it's smooth in, slight increase mid-corner, then you get on power, it pushes. And this is what I explained already, why it's so good for bumps and sweepers and on-power sections, because the front end naturally is calm and wants to just push. It doesn't want to turn the car. It doesn't have that initial grip, initial side bite. So it's good for those things. So then the rear end. The rear end on a pillow ball car is made to be dominant. And what I mean is that where I said that the front end is dominant on a C-Hub car, the rear end is dominant on a pillow ball car. That means that it's more critical for the setup to get the rear end right. So the front end is kind of, you just set it to be smooth and numb and handle the bumps. Okay, that's good. The rear end, it's smooth on corner entry, then it has less grip mid-corner, but then when you get on power, it's not like the C-Hub car now. It doesn't stop the slide and grip. It actually increases the slide if you're sliding, or just if it has grip, it wants to turn the car more. It wants to rotate the car. So when you get on power, the rear end rotates the car more. So you have oversteer on power, basically. So you adjust the rear of the car for mid-corner and on-power steering. This is sort of backwards to what you would do on a C-Hub car, but it's important to understand this, because I think many people tend to think that, okay, so I need to adjust steering, I'm gonna set the front of the car up. But it's not always that way, and here I hope that you understand that, especially on these cars like a Mugen, the rear end is often what you need to look at if you want to affect steering. One more thing that I want to just mention before we continue. Apart from this scrub radius in the front, offset in the rear, and how tires either toe in or toe out when accelerating and when braking, there's something else important that happens on the rear end of the car. And this is mainly at the point where mid-corner you're getting on power and more load is transferred to the rear of the car. This is the real key point. Like when things go wrong in a corner, I think this is a relevant point to look at. We need to look at this image here. This is a car now. So this is the chassis of the car. This is the upper link. This is the hub, the lower arm. This is the tire. And now imagine that this car is driving away from you and turning left again. So it's turning left, and this is the center of gravity. So there's a centrifugal force that wants to roll the chassis outward. What that means is that this lower arm here is pushing on the rear hub. And as the centrifugal force is rolling the chassis outwards, more load is transferred onto this tire, the outside tire. So there's a heavier load on the outside tire, lighter load on the inside tire. That means that there's a lateral force here stopping the car from just continuing straight. So the car is turning, and well, if this is the rear end of the car, this lateral force is stopping the rear from sliding out. The rear is following the front around the corner now. Because of this lower arm pushing on the hub, this hub actually wants to fall over this in this direction. It wants to fall over into positive camber. And what's stopping the rear hub from the rear outer hub from falling into positive camber is the upper link. So the upper link here is actually being stretched, and the upper link is pulling on the chassis. And why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because the geometry itself of a car affects the stiffness. It affects how the car rolls. So there's something that I would call geometric roll stiffness. So by adjusting the geometry of the car, we can make a car softer or harder. So it's not just by changing shock positions or springs that we can make a car harder or softer in roll. We can also do it with the geometry. So for example, just a quick example, the link here. If we lower the link on the tower, this upper link is going to be resisting the chassis movement down here, because the chassis wants to roll and this location wants to roll downwards here. Well, the link is pulling it up at the same time, so it's not allowing the chassis to roll down. And if we lower the link enough, what happens is, with a high roll center, we're not going to talk about roll centers now, but with a high roll center, this link will actually lift the chassis up, so the whole car will actually rise up when it wants to roll. But what's relevant now for this discussion is the fact that this upper link pulling on the chassis resists roll, and it makes the car stiffer. Now, if we were to raise the link a lot here on the inside, we are lowering the roll center a lot. Okay, we can achieve a situation where the link actually pulls on the chassis and wants to roll it downwards. So it introduces more roll. So that force actually is helping to roll the car instead of helping to keep it flat and resisting roll. So yes, there is that. But let's focus on this case where this upper link is resisting the roll. That's often what we have in our cars, in corners. Okay, so why is this relevant? It's relevant for this reason. Again, we look at the rear hub and how on a KYOSHO style situation where the center line of the tire is to the outside of the outer hinge pin. As the load increases on this tire, it will try to rotate the hub into negative camber. So it's reducing the force that's already in the upper link from that lower arm pushing on the hub, trying to rotate it into positive camber. So the two forces are opposed. And then in the other case, on a typical pillow ball car on a Mugen, where the center line of the tire is to the inside of the hinge pin, as load increases on that tire, the load tries to rotate the hub into positive camber in the same direction as the force caused by the lower arm pushing on the hub, trying to flip the hub into positive camber. So the offset force is adding to that other force. So there is even more force in the upper link. So KYOSHO style reduces the force in the upper link, and Mugen style adds to the force in the upper link. So what does this mean for the car then? It means that with the KYOSHO style rear hub, when you're mid-corner and you get on power, the upper link isn't going to resist the roll of the car as much, so the car will be softer. Now, this is actually one reason why, if we look at some pictures of the cars, we see that on KYOSHO cars, typically the shocks are relatively stood up, because when you stand the shock up, it supports the rear of the car more. And the KYOSHO needs this, because here you can also see well how much offset the car has. So the hinge pin is here, and the hex is far out here, because we want, or they want, the center point of the contact patch to be outside of the hinge pin. So the car is turning right now. More load ends up on this outer rear tire. The load will want to flip this hub into negative camber. But the force coming from the arm here wants to flip it into positive camber. So the forces are working against each other. That means that the force here in the upper link is smaller. So there's less geometric roll resistance, which means that we have to rely more on the shock and the spring. So on the KYOSHO, the rear shocks are stood up more for this reason. Then if we look at the Mugen, for example, on a Mugen, the shocks are often very laid down. Now, they can do this and get away with it because, let's see if I have a picture of a Mugen hub. Okay, so on the Mugen hub, the hinge pin is very close to the hex. So what happens is, like we've explained already, the contact patch will be to the inside of the hinge pin. So in this situation, as more load is transferred onto this outside tire in a corner, the load on the tire will try to flip this hub into positive camber. And that's the same direction that the lower arm is pushing on the hub, flipping it into positive camber. So those two forces add to each other. So there's more force in the upper link. So there's more geometric roll resistance in the geometry of this car, which means that they can run the shocks more laid down because the geometry is keeping the rear end of the car more flat. So they don't have to rely on the shock position and the shock spring to support the car. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to mention this also because these two things, this point is actually the opposite. So the twisting forces are opposite on a Mugen rear hub and a KYOSHO rear hub. And this second twisting force from the vertical load is also opposite. So the rear hubs are completely different in the way they work, and really important to know when you are adjusting the car, really. And this is why, for example, on a KYOSHO, when you go to a wider hex, you are increasing the distance here. So you are increasing the moment arm. So on the front, you are increasing the scrub radius with a wider hex. And on the rear, you are increasing the offset. So that means that if we look at the front, when you put the wider hex on, you have a longer scrub radius, more force is transferred to the knuckle. You have even more responsive steering. And when you put a narrow hex on, you have less responsive steering and a shorter scrub radius. Now if we look at the Mugen, it's actually the opposite to the KYOSHO. So on a Mugen, if you put a wider hex on, then you're actually reducing the scrub radius. So reducing the forces that effect the force can have on the steering. And if you put a narrower hex on, you are increasing the scrub radius. So they are the opposite in this way. If you want more aggressive steering, and if you're on a smooth track, bumps aren't a problem, then on a KYOSHO you would go to a wide hex. On a Mugen you would go to a narrow hex. If you want the car to be better in bumps, not catch so much, have less side bite, on a KYOSHO you would go to a narrow hex. On a Mugen you would go to a wide hex. So it's the opposite. And the same is actually true for the rear end. So if we look at the KYOSHO style, if you go to a wide hex on a KYOSHO, you are increasing the offset. If you go to a narrower hex, you're reducing the offset. So on a KYOSHO with a wide hex, you'll have more side bite, more aggressive grip. So you'll have more grip into the corner on the rear. Then maybe because of that, if you overcook it, you lose the rear in the corner. But then when you get on power, it grips really well again. If you go to a narrower hex, all those transitions will be smoother. So you have less grip going in, so that you won't notice it as much as you reduce the grip in the corner. Then you get on the gas, you don't have quite as much grip again when you accelerate. Mugen, this is different again. So on the Mugen, if you go to a wider hex, you are reducing the offset. So that means that the forces will be smaller again. So the wider hex will actually be better in bumps. The differences in grip will be more subtle, smaller. And on the Mugen, if you go to a narrow hex, you are increasing the offset. So that means the forces will be bigger, which means that the car will be worse in bumps and the differences in grip will be bigger also. So you'll actually have more of that oversteer on power. As you get on power in the corner, the rear will want to turn the car more. So yeah, this is important to note and remember. Not all cars are the same. You can't set all cars up the same. And finally, I want to show you some examples. The TLR. Because this was a car that actually, originally when it was released, they released one version which just didn't work at all. Actually, they didn't even release it, I think. They made a car and they couldn't get it to work, so they had to remake it. Partially, at least. Now, the problem that they faced was that they basically made they just put, I don't know what they were thinking, to be honest, but they just copied a Mugen rear end and put it on a car, and then they had a sort of Losi style front end on it. And well, the front end was just too aggressive, so the front end was steering a lot, and then the rear end, as we've discussed, also turned the car. So when you were mid-corner and you got on power, they would just do a donut, basically, if you weren't paying attention. Like the front end would turn the car and the rear end would turn the car. So if you remember, I said the pillow ball car, front end, very numb, neutral. Rear end turns the car. Okay, voila, we're good. KYOSHO, front end turns the car, rear end grips very good. Good and stable. So TLR made a car where both ends of the car were aggressive. And even now, so we look at the current one, which is the fixed version, it still has this same thing where they have this C-hub steering, plus they have this knuckle is super long. So they have a lot of offset here on the front, and with that offset, they have a big scrub radius. So that's going to make the front end quite aggressive. And then when we look at the rear end of, I didn't find a bigger picture of this, but when we look at the rear end of the TLR, you see here that it's like a Mugen, this hub. The hinge pin is here and the hex is very close. So very little offset, and the center point of the wheel will be to the inside of the hinge pin. So it will do what a Mugen does. You go in the corner, mid-corner, you get on power, the rear end will want to turn the car. So that's TLR's problem, actually. So the people who are having issues with this car because it turns too much, that's the problem. The front end is turning the car and the rear end is turning the car. The front end is super aggressive off power, and on power it turns the car also. And then the rear end off power is sort of neutral to slightly loose, and then when you get on power it turns the car also. So that's all there is to it. That's the issue. Then if we look at the Sworkz, now this is an interesting case. I actually asked Robert about this situation because Canas has been fast and Canas has been beating Robert in Spain. And I asked Robert that, do you feel that Canas has more drive out of corners than you? Do you feel that you are losing to him on your polished, slippery tracks out of the corner? And Robert said he does. He thinks that Canas gains on him in those situations. And, well, we have an explanation for that. So, now this, I know I'm going to sound like a dickhead, but I'm going to say it. Sometimes these things happen, and in RC, there aren't that many designers that really know what's going on. Often what happens is they just copy something from one car and copy something from another and just mix and match and something happens. So what Sworkz did was Sworkz first car, they just copied a Mugen pretty much. And then for some reason they decided that they would copy the KYOSHO rear end. Maybe they were thinking like, okay, so our rear end's kind of loose or something, and KYOSHO has really good rear grip. Let's put a KYOSHO rear end on it. Okay, so KYOSHO rear end. This is the Sworkz rear hub. Looks a lot like KYOSHO too, ironically. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the same geometry as KYOSHO. They made a new one, however, which the offset is slightly less, and they have an insert here too, where you can adjust the amount of offset, I believe. But this is the key. The fact that they have a pillow ball front means that the front end is pretty neutral and calm. Then they have a lot of offset in the rear, which, if you remember, good grip going in, slightly less mid-corner so the car rotates, then you get on power, the rear end grips. So probably this development with less offset on the rear hub is because the top guys said they need more steering. The car doesn't turn enough. They need more steering, so they tested all kinds of stuff and they figured, oh, this works. But this hub, it looks like the offset is the same direction as on a KYOSHO, not as on a Mugen. Or then it's very close to zero. At least with the insert you can get it to be as on the KYOSHO. And what would this do? This would mean that when Canas gets on power in a corner on a slippery track, he's already turned the car. He's drifted through the corner, he's on power, he wants to go. The rear end grips and goes. So he doesn't have to be afraid when getting on power. The front end is smooth. The rear end doesn't want to turn the car, it wants to grip and go. Robert, on the other hand, with the Mugen, so we remember the Mugen rear hub, Robert, when he is chasing Canas gets on power and accelerates out of the corner. Robert gets on power, the rear hub wants to turn the car. So Robert isn't just punching it and going. Robert is getting on power, car wants to oversteer, straighten out, go. Do you see what I mean? So that is where he's losing a bit of time. So hopefully this helps to show you that it's not that as straightforward as, oh, C-hub does this, pillow ball does that. The rear end also affects the overall picture and the handling of the car, and there's not one correct answer. So it's more of a case where the designer of the car has to pick a front end, a rear end, and decide what he wants to achieve, and then do that, basically. And when you mix and match and when you don't understand what's going on, you can end up with weird situations where the front and rear are fighting each other, or they are compounding each other in the way where the car either just pushes a lot, or it turns a lot, or in a certain on power it turns a lot, but off power it doesn't. Like, there are so different scenarios for what you can end up with, and this was hard to explain. I hope you understood. Okay, so what did you think of my theory? Do you agree with this, of why the C-Hub cars are the way they are and pivot ball cars the way they are?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So it's a good explanation. Yeah.
So do you think that there's any hope? Can we make the KYOSHO handle like you want, or is it a lost cause? Do you need balls in your
No,
life?
no, honestly, I already felt great this year. I mean, like we said before, there's not so many races to show off, but I think, yeah, it's just maybe small details that I've already been working on the car, and I think it's just setup changes, so it's pretty basic.
Okay. So what we want to achieve is, the C-Hub cars naturally has a responsive front end and responsive steering. So we want your car to have less responsive steering, because that's what the pivot ball car has. It has a very numb front end. So the initial steering isn't that aggressive, right?
Yep.
Then we want the car to rotate mid-corner. So the rear can't be gripping too much. So we need to, the thing is that the C-Hub car, the rear end, has good entry grip. And then mid-corner, you might lose grip a bit. So we need to sort of reduce the grip on entry so that it's, that transition from high entry grip to lower mid-corner grip is very smooth. So you can enter aggressively and the car won't suddenly lose its rear end. It just it needs to happen gradually.
Yep.
And then you want to be able to get on power and still turn the car. Now, that's a natural thing that happens in the pivot ball car, because the front end pushes on power and the rear end makes it oversteer on power. So the rear end is turning the car. So we need to figure out a setup on a C-Hub car where the rear end doesn't grip so much on power and just want to go straight. So we need to figure that out, I guess. But
I already checked
yeah,
a few things like about it, and it depends on the tracks, because when the first time I went on the track with the MP10, I was using the original, the stock 2.5 rear sway bar, and I felt I had too much on power steering. But
okay.
it was in Padova. There was like 2 or 3 corners where you could feel like you needed rotation, but in Padova you need off power rotation, not on power.
Yeah.
The track is not big
So,
enough to have like on power steering. So then I went to the 2.8 rear sway bars, and then I went on different tracks after that, and I felt like going down back to 2.7 was better.
so when you say on power steering, though, do you mean that you got on power and the car got loose, so the rear end would just kind of slide around?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a distinction there also, because I think what happens with many of the pillow ball cars is when you get on power and you have on power steering, it's not the case that, oh, the rear just got loose. It's more the case that the car turns. Do you see that there's a difference there, in my opinion?
Yeah, like we said before, it's like you have the feeling that the front is pulling, and it's not like the rear end being loose.
Yeah. Okay, so I prepared some videos for us to watch, and this will show you driving different cars on a couple of different tracks, I think. I think I have a few of Montpellier here. And we start with some balls. We have to start with some balls.
Pretty old
Make you happy.
videos then.
This is 2013 Euros.
Nice.
No foul. And now Savoya has to catch up Ronefalk with 11.5 minutes to go of the 45.
So you're catching Ronefalk for the Euros win. Sliding into corners.
Without mini camera, but it's causing everyone no end of trouble. And Ronefalk does it well there, and in fact, he's slightly eked out his lead.
I had only rear brakes for that race, I think.
Really? Well, watch this at the end of the straight.
Savoya to try and catch up Ronefalk.
Sideways.
Into frame there.
Sideways.
That tight line is taken by.
Okay,
Ronefalk.
actually, that's a great example there. Let's see. Watch this corner now. This is when I think of your driving style. This is what I think.
Savoya to try and.
Ronefalk, notice he's turning. Ronefalk is turning like all four wheels are gripping basically.
Is on.
C-hub style driving.
Savoya to try and.
Didn't slide at any point really. Just turned around the corner.
Yep.
And then you're sideways already. Yep, on power out. Watch. This is the main corner. I mean, this is the essence of driving with balls. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turning aggressive, and you said you turn in early. How early is that? You're like not even at the corner, and you're sideways.
Yes.
You're freaking sideways. So you just crank the steering. You're sliding at this point, and then where's the corner? Oh, there it is. Okay, just get on the gas, and the car starts turning more. And you actually clip that curb. But see, this is the crazy thing. You clip the curb on the exit of the corner. Like most people would, they enter too early, or they clip the curb on entry. You clip the curb on exit.
And I'm already full
what?
Wood.
What?
And I'm already on full throttle already, so yeah.
Yeah,
when I clip it,
so
it's already too late. It's not like when you clip
full.
it going in. So.
Yeah.
To try and catch up Ronefalk, and he flies into frame there as that tight line is taken by Ronefalk. The young Swede, the TQ.
So I think
Savoya, third qualifier, but he won the
often people watch something like this and they think, oh, it's just two different driving styles. Yes, that's true, but it's also two different styles of car design. That's what people look. You're sliding everywhere.
Across the road by his fellow Swedes, and yeah,
and
definitely.
You probably picked up the video where Micah was sliding around more than anywhere else. Like, I had many guys trying my car. I remember Jason Rona trying my car after the Euros, and he said, "Whew, that you did 45 minutes like that." I said, "Yeah," and he said, "No, it's impossible." So yeah.
But I guess it's just because it's something that suits your way of driving, so it doesn't feel sketchy to you. It feels comfortable to you.
Yeah, because I'm used to driving this way, turning in early, and yeah, I think that's how I learned how to drive. I think because I probably learned more than with these cars than those cars. But I ran KYOSHO cars for maybe 4 or 5 years before the Mugen. So
before the Mugen, I thought you had Chrono.
Yeah.
Didn't you have Chrono?
Yeah, but even before that, I was like, I had Chrono, and it was like a pivot ball. So before the Chrono was KYOSHO for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, but you only got fast. You only got fast after you switched away from the KYOSHO to the Chrono. You got
I was
even your
like,
early career.
Even
your early career, you got fast.
First big races I won with the KYOSHO. Like the B National Championship in France, I was like B National Champion with the KYOSHO. 7.5 and P 7.5.
Notice the B there. No one's ever heard of that. You could be making that up. B champion. You got fast when you got balls. Chrono had balls. Okay, next video. This is now TLR 8X, I believe, right? Montpellier 2019.
2019, yeah, it was.
Okay, now watch this shit. So oversteering on power now, that could be a good thing for you. I think we'll see some interesting things happen here soon.
Maybe one lap after that.
But you had a lot of steering with this car, right?
Yes.
Now you did it right. So the thing that I'm seeing with you driving this is that it's so responsive. The car itself is responsive. The front end is turning the car quickly, and that's causing you some issues. Turning in too soon, or having to correct, or you clip a curb, you clip the next 3 curbs. The front end is sort of grabby, but the rear end is also turning the car.
Yep.
So the rear end is kind of what you want, but the front end isn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it totally makes sense.
So on power, you are actually getting that same effect that you get on the Mugen, for example, or other pillow bowl cars, where you're in the corner, you get on power, and the rear wants to turn the car. But for example, after watching that video of you driving, the problem is that the front end is also turning the car. So it's making the car nervous. The front end is responsive and turns a lot. And then you get on power mid-corner like you want to, and the rear end turns the car even more. So it makes the car sort of tricky to control unless it's perfectly set up. Would you agree with that? How that TLR felt?
Yeah, that's the feeling I had. Like in that window where your setup and tires were right, you had maybe one of the fastest car out there. But as soon as maybe you do a wrong tire choice, then you're like 1 second off, or it's super hard to drive. So you're like going down, and not pushing it. So you're not aggressive. You're not
So would you
being at
say
your
that
maximum.
if you were off pace, it was because the car felt too nervous and you just had to back it down? Or what was
No,
the
it's like
main problem?
it in some races now I feel like sometimes with the exact same car, if you feel confident, you can be like 3 or 4 tenths quicker just because you're confident. It's not
Right.
only about the car. It's just you feel it, you feel right with how everything suits together. And even if sometimes the car is great, then you're not feeling it, it's not perfect yet, then you're not pushing it, so you're slow, and you're obviously off pace.
Yeah. Okay, and then same track, Montpellier again, but this time with the KYOSHO. So was this your first race with the KYOSHO?
It was Padova was the first race, but it was one of the first
so
big
one
events.
of the early ones. So the thing that strikes me here is how, I think it's here, for example. Yeah, so the rear end is just stuck. Like it's gripping so much, and you kind of want it to slide. So yes, the front end turns, like even there, it just turned so much you clip the curb. But the rear end is just gripping.
Yeah.
And I think that you are the kind of driver that you want it to slide around, a controlled slide. But see, it's just maximum grip everywhere.
Yeah, my mechanic always says like I'm maybe doing even more mistakes when the rear end is stuck, and I feel the car is pushy, so I'm pushing it even more to try to get that steering out of the rear end, and it's even worse.
Yeah. And there was actually a more recent video, and I think maybe you worked on your setup a bit and improved it, because there you could see that the rear was
A little bit more
sliding a bit.
maybe. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. So Buggyland. Do you feel that you had improved the setup since Montpellier, so the car was more to your liking?
Yeah, of course. Buggyland was where my car felt pretty much the best this season. Actually, like I've seen that video. That's why also I posted it because I felt like it was suiting what I wanted more than what I had previously. So I practiced as much as I could before this race and figure out what I wanted the car to do, and so
Yeah, here we
yeah,
still.
that's the qualifier where I TQ'd actually, like this qualifier. And I had a good pace and I was
TQ.
really confident. Yeah, that's a TQ run.
Okay, watch. So I have to watch and learn here. But watch this. So this is also a difference here. So you go in, you turn the wheel pretty aggressively, but C-Hub car, the front end is aggressive, so it really turns the car a lot. Now it turns the car to where the rear end, which is also gripping, it goes over what the rear end can provide in traction, so it starts to slide, and it slides a bit too much. So you actually counter steer to correct. But as soon as you get on the gas, the rear grips again. So we can see that happen here. Oversteer, slide on the gas, and it stops sliding and goes straight. So what we need to figure out for you on the KYOSHO is how to control this. How do we get this so it turns in smooth and you can be on aggressive, get on power, and it won't just go straight on power. You can still turn on power. That's what we need to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Because at this point, I still think if you had balls there, you'd have TQ'd by more. I don't care what you say. I know it.
No, I'm honestly, like, it's really interesting for me to see all those videos, like, because the first one was maybe almost 10 years ago. And it's really interesting to see what I want my car to do. And I think 10 years ago, I didn't want my car to do that. I mean, I wouldn't want my car to do that today. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's, because I
that's
changed
kind of
a
my
bit my
point.
driving style, or because, I'm more used to the KYOSHO now, or just because I'm older and, I just want my car to be easier to drive. But I wouldn't think to drive 45 minutes with a car that was like that from your first video, you know.
Okay, then let's watch this. One more, last one. This should be with X-ray from Montpellier when you had balls. So sliding, but nothing ridiculous. So it's like the rear end is sliding slightly.
Yep.
It's not gripping to 100%. There's this sort of rally drift,
It
modern
feels
rally
like
drift.
the rear end is sliding even before I like hit the steering actually, or it's just
Yeah,
a
actually.
small amount of steering and the rear is already sliding.
So now you get up here and the car is sliding, drift. Oh, you actually steered also. But watch how it looks full speed, that section. You see, like drift, counter steer drift again.
Yep.
Actually, that corner too. This one's a good one too. This is kind of what you explained in the beginning of this video. So maximum lock, you're turning in, car is sliding, and this is like way before the apex of the corner. You're
So I
probably going to get
realized
on
that
power
I'm too
now.
early. Yep.
Well, yeah, your mechanic says now you're turning too early. Yeah, that moment that I paused, you got on the power.
Yeah.
So many drivers, I think, at this point would be sort of off power turning here. The car would still be sort of heading towards the camera at this point, but you're off power, accelerating onto the next straight. There you go. So turn in early, drift on power already, and you're out.
That's why I'm taking out so many drivers out of the corner, because I'm on the gas a lot earlier.
Yeah, and this is why I say that you need balls in your life, because this is what you can do with balls. But hey, let's not give up hope. We'll figure out how the KYOSHO can do this too.
So you see, it was a TQ round.
This?
Again.
Yeah.
But it was 10 years ago, maybe more.
10 years ago. But it's with balls. And it's because the front end is numb. The front end isn't trying to turn the car. The front end is just sort of plowing. And so you turn the wheel a lot to get the car turned into the corner. You get on the power early, and the rear end turns the car on power.
Yep.
Slide. Well, there's a bump. You couldn't get on power. So the fact that the front end is so forgiving means that you can drive aggressively. Again, you turned in too early. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Too early, you have to correct. Yeah, I guess that really is the thing you need to focus on. Anyway, I think everyone gets the point. So how do we make the KYOSHO like this? That's the question now. Okay, let me ask you first. What have you done? From this, are you just running the Mike Craddock standard setup? Oh, I don't know what the standard setup is. Or are you doing something of your own?
No, I'm just doing things on my own. We've been chatting a lot with Joao Figueiredo and Mike also. Mike also tried a few things on the shock pistons and everything. So yeah, but basically when I go on the track, I'm alone and I'm doing my stuff. So I'm just checking the feeling of the car, the lap times, and I'm adjusting the setup where I'm feeling more comfortable, faster, and more consistent. So
yeah, I think I have a few ideas that I would be curious to see if you tried them, to see what you think. The first thing is we need to reduce the difference between when the rear is gripping and when it lets go. So we need to make the rear kind of slide controllably. So one way to do that on the KYOSHO, it has so much rear offset. So you have an insert on the rear arm, I think. Yep. So let's see if I can find a KYOSHO setup sheet.
So you are going to the Yuichi Kanai setup then? Because usually uses the middle. Here, yeah, we have an insert here. So I'm fully out. Here, I'm fully out. And Yuichi uses the middle position here. So it puts even more offset, I guess.
So wait, so I would make the arm as long as possible with the insert.
That's what we
and then move the hub as far in as possible. So reduce the width. So you have an insert in the hub that you can do that or no?
Yes, we have an insert that we can spin and put in the hub more in. The hub is more out now.
Yeah, so I would put the hub more in, and I would use the narrowest rear hex possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I would do that is because that will reduce your grip on corner entry, which is good because you want it to sort of slide into the corner a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it will reduce the chance of the rear end then suddenly breaking loose. And then when you get on power, it won't grip as much also.
Okay, but it will go with a shorter arm, like pretty much going with a shorter arm in the back, and I would have more rotation.
No, longer.
Like,
you do like the maximum arm length.
oh yeah, I
setting,
keep the arm.
and then just
Okay,
move the,
and I
yeah.
just move the arm.
Then you
Okay.
just move the
Yeah,
hub
yeah,
in and narrow hex.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And then, so if you reduce the grip on the rear, you still have the problem that the front is so aggressive. So I would try to reduce front aggression and steering into the corner also. So actually I would go narrow hex there also to reduce the responsiveness into the corner.
Mm-hmm. What about caster and Kickup then?
I was just thinking about that. So probably I would try more caster, and I would even try more Kickup, because I want that initial response to be low, but then I want the car to turn on power. So the more Kickup will make it smoother into the corner, more caster will make it smoother into the corner, and both also will have slightly more grip mid to exit, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
So I would do that, and then I would also run a lot of Ackermann. So show me the steering knuckle you have now.
We have like, yeah, just one.
Okay, you have these, so you can't change the, show it from
No, we can't
above.
change the arm.
You can't change this arm, but aren't there two different ones
on the Ackermann plate here?
Don't you have two different knuckles?
Nope, there was just the MP9 and the MP9 TKI3, and then TKI4, which is the MP10.
Okay, find out what the difference is on the knuckles. What you would want is this link, the steering link on the knuckle, to move it inwards. So basically the arm on the knuckle would be longer.
Wouldn't change anything to
the problem is
here
even
also?
if the problem is that it doesn't work the same. So okay, let's see. When you move the links, let's see, the links inwards on the knuckles, so that that arm on the knuckle is longer, you're increasing Ackermann. But the way it does it is initial steering is much smoother. So, and that's what you want. You want smoother initial steering. So you would want a longer arm on the knuckle and move the links inwards. On the inside, when you adjust it to have more Ackermann, you move the links back on the Ackermann plate, but that actually increases initial steering, and then the car pushes after that. So it's, even though both are adding Ackermann, they do so in a different way, and the effect on track is different. So on the inside, if I was only changing the inside, I think for you it would be best to run it as far forward as possible, like further forward on the Ackermann plate.
That's why I'm already using it a little bit more forward than what is the standard setup.
You are? Okay, then good. Go even further forward.
That's
like,
one.
there
that's
was
one
still
of the
some
things
holes
I
there,
changed.
right?
That's one of the things I changed from the Montpellier warm up to the race. Actually, like I felt the front rear balance was wrong, and before the warm up, I went one step forward, and I felt a lot better. But I didn't go all the way forward actually. I know Ricardo Berton used it all the way forward, I think, back in the days.
Okay, so what that does is it reduces the initial steering response, and then you will have
more mid-corner,
more steering mid to exit. And again, that's what you want.
Yep.
Yeah, especially mid-corner. And then I found a setup sheet actually. So let's look at this. So I don't know what race this is, but I mean, it's the most recent I saw.
Yeah.
Diffs. So diffs is interesting. Have you played around with diffs? Because the way I would see it is, I think to get the KYOSHO to drive more like you want it, you need to run a bit of a wacky diff setup.
I like 15-5-15 right now.
15-5-15.
I need to try in different conditions, but that's the diff setup I tried lately on 2 different tracks, and I loved the way the car worked, how it worked.
Okay, so I think that
is it the wacky?
Okay, it makes sense.
Have in mind?
Yeah, it's one of it. It's not the wacky I had in mind, but it makes sense. So that diff setup means that in the front you have 15.
This setup shit was like a concrete track, like it was a lot of asphalt, a lot of synthetic. So that's why I went that high on the diff setup. It's not usually when I'm using my like basic setup is 7.73 actually.
Yeah. That sounds normal. 10-10-5 or 7.73 or something.
Yeah.
But the problem with that kind of diff setup is that I don't think the car will do what you want it to do. So you said you like 15-5-15.
Yeah, that's.
So,
I mean, I didn't race with it yet, but since I started testing after Buggyland, I tried many combination on different tracks, and on 2 different tracks, 15-5-15 was definitely the fastest and the most comfortable I felt.
I think the reason you like that is that 15 in the front, it calms down the steering of power a bit. The thin center diff, it makes the car rotate off power. So, and you need that when you go in the corner. Then the 15 in the rear, it really makes the rear grip on corner entry. So you have a car that is relatively neutral going in. It still rotates off power, but it doesn't rotate too much because the rear is gripping so much with that thick diff oil. So I think, if I have to guess now, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but when you went to that diff setup, you could be a bit more aggressive going into the corner.
Of course.
Okay, and then the second reason you like it is once you've gone into the corner aggressively and you get on power aggressive on the front end, thick diff oil, okay? And we already spoke about the C-Hub car, the front end turns the car on power. So it's turning. The center diff is thin. So this is the part I disagree with. The center diff is thin, so it won't allow the rear to step out. You can accelerate hard. But the rear diff oil is thick to where the rear has the maximum drive it can have. So the rear will naturally want to drive the car forward and slide out a bit because you you are demanding too much of the rear with that thick diff oil. So the rear diff oil makes the rear end drift a bit on power. So I think that's why you like it. But my wacky diff setup idea was to sort of maybe flip it around a bit, where maybe the thinnest diff you have on some tracks is the front, and then I don't know what, like say 10, 10 or 7.
Yeah.
And then you'd go relatively thick in the center and then the same thickness in the rear, or maybe even thicker in the rear, like 7, 10, 15 or something. So 7 front, 10 middle, 15 rear, something crazy like this. And but hear me out, this is why, because then the thick center diff and thick rear diff don't allow the car to turn into the corner. So even though the front end is aggressive, they don't allow it to turn into the corner so much. So you can turn the car in, but the car naturally kind of wants to push a bit. So when you turn aggressive, it will slide. Okay, so you're in the corner. Then you get on power. And now the thin front diff means that the aggressive front end can't turn the car as much on power. So the front end isn't grabbing and turning the car. The center diff means that it's transferring more drive to the rear. And the thick rear diff means that the rear will sort of drift on power. So it's kind of simulating what a pillow ball car would do naturally. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that totally makes sense.
Now, the problem with this is not a setup that I think would work everywhere. Like you go to Neo Race or some US track, like, just it's not going to work. But I'm talking about Montpellier or French tracks in general, sort of, or like a smooth, fast track. those kind of tracks. I think even Buggyland maybe could work. Buggyland is a bit 3D, so I'm not sure, but
Yeah, it was
still,
kind of flat and high speed this year. So
yeah. But that's something that I would try, because it's with the diffs. What you can do with the diffs is you can change the character of the car on and off power, and that's what you want to achieve really now. So maybe try something like that.
yeah, and I honestly think also it depends on the cars. I felt like sometimes different cars that I had before, the diff setup didn't change much on the behavior of the car. I feel the KYOSHO is really reactive about the diff setup, and you can really change the behavior of the car, the way you're gonna do some overdrive effect, adjusting the center diffs, and it's really interesting to work on the diff setup in this car.
Yeah. Also, in my opinion, the front diff doesn't really do that much unless you make like a really massive change. Even then, actually, I don't think the front diff does that much, but the rear diff is key.
On many,
When you make,
yeah, on many different
yeah,
cars, I have the same feeling. Yeah.
yeah. So I just see this here. So the C hub. What about this? You have it short here. Have you tried it long on the C hub? The upper
Yeah,
link.
I started long, and I didn't really like it. I felt the car was not like having enough steering mid corner, so I went shorter.
Okay, I would think that you would like to have it long, like you run it long and then set the car up around that. So the narrow hexes, long rear arm, move the hub in, the narrow hex rear, narrow hex front, long upper link, play around with diff setup. I think probably you would run a lower amount of rear toe in. What do you run now? 3 normally? 2.5?
2.5.
Is 2.5 the lowest you can go?
It's the I don't know if we can like spin the bushings and go lower, but yeah, on the regular bushings, 2.5 is the minimum.
Yeah. So maybe. Okay. So Kanai has 2 things to do for you now. Longer arms on the knuckles, so you can shorten the link on the steering link on the knuckle, and less toe in. You need that. If you don't get balls, you need those 2 things at least.
It's good that the world has been delayed.
Right. And here the steering plates. Okay, so you are further forward, but you can still even flip the whole plate.
Yes,
and go
that's
even
what I was
further
talking
forward.
about. Like Ricardo was.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ricardo had this flipped.
Yeah, and
to
he
the
had,
front
I think,
and
the
running
same
front.
position as I run, but flipped, so it was moving forward. It was moved forward, like maybe 1 hole.
Okay. Sway bar. Okay. Honestly, the sway bar, I don't know. The sway bar. Sway bar, I don't know. I have to be honest with you. I can see it both ways. I can see it where a thick rear sway bar would be good for you, and I can see it where thin one would be good. Why would a thin one be good? I think because it's like when you lay the rear shocks down, you get more rotation in hairpins.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that? So it's kind of the similar effect where
Yes.
sort of mid corner to exit, you can have more steering if you allow the rear of the car to roll. So lay the rear shock down or a thinner rear sway bar. So
That's
that's why
exactly what happens on the KYOSHO rear ends. Like from 2.7 to 2.5, I have more rotation, like mid to exit.
So right now, which one would you say that you prefer for your driving style? Like thick or thin, or stood up shocks or lay down?
I like lay down and a thinner shock and a thinner sway bar in the back.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I can see that, but I wasn't sure. And the reason is that because you'd like to drive the car on power.
From that setup, I changed for Buggyland. For example, my shocks were fully laid down in the back and still 2.7 sway bar.
wait, oh yeah, here. Okay, so you had them in the middle and you laid them down. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure because also what happens is it can make it so the car isn't as good on power to where it wants to sort of fall onto the rear outer tire and
Mm-hmm.
makes it kind of squirmy or unstable. That's why it's not a straightforward thing that, okay, you drive like this, you are going to want to lay down your shocks and run a thin sway bar. Not necessarily. You could also want to have them stood up and a thick sway bar because it keeps the rear end more flat. But if the rear end is sliding, then it's good that it stays flat. You can get on power slide and exit. So that's what I was wondering. But it sounds like maybe lay down shocks and see how thin on the rear sway bar you can go.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sometimes they use 2.5 on the KYOSHO, at
Yes,
least MP9.
I think Joao is using a thicker sway bar in the front than I do, and maybe about the same back. Yep.
Yeah, but then again, the front sway bar, the problem for you would be, I think, that a thickest one front sway bar actually makes the steering more responsive, but then it pushes after the first response, and you want the opposite. You want the car to not be responsive and then turn. So I think you want a thin front sway
Exactly.
bar to be.
That's why I ran thinner sway bars. Like for example, in earlier in the season, I went 2.1 in the front because I felt like the car was doing what I wanted, more like more numb around neutral and more mid corner steering.
Yeah. So what did you run now at Buggyland?
I had 2.4, I think, because the grip was a little bit higher.
Okay. So you had 2.4 and what did you say?
And 2.7 in the back.
2.7.
Yeah,
Okay.
same.
Yeah. And what caster did you have there?
Same, 17.5.
Same. So you can go all the way to 19.
I can, but I never tried. Like I started with 16 because from when we started the season, it was Padova or Montpellier. It was like small tracks, no grip. You need a lot of steering, and it's not super high speed
Yeah.
tracks, so you need a lot of like off power steering. So that's why I went 16. And then by the time I got used to the car, I went to 17. But I
Okay,
feel like
Pistons.
going 19 would be like okay for
Yeah, I
like
think,
most
yeah,
of the
like I said
season,
before.
but then you go in like super special conditions like Montpellier or Padova, and you come out with 19 degrees caster, and then you feel like you have no steering at all. So
I would think that you would run 19 most of the time, and then when you are at Padova or something unique like that, then you would run 17.5.
mm-hmm.
But I would think that your standard setup should be 19. What then Pistons? I don't know. Pistons is, for me, Pistons is more for the sort of overall response or how the car jumps, lands, handles bumps, overall grip.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think it's really a solution for you, for your lack of balls on the KYOSHO issue. you know, I don't see it being a solution.
Oh, it doesn't change much. I mean, it can give more traction, like more overall grip, more like the car to be more reactive, more responsive. But
Yeah, I'm trying to think what could be that. Okay, if I really have to go science mode and think like, okay, what can we shave a tenth off? Can we make it a bit more like, can we give it a bit more balls? I would think that you would want to run, again, a bit different to what people tend to run. You would want to run slightly bigger holes in the front, again, because it makes the car less responsive, and smaller holes in the rear, because you don't want it to grip so much. You want it to allow the rear to slide a bit. What would be the best way to do that?
honestly, when I tried like 813s in the front, or at least having the same shock package front and rear, I felt like the front was too numb. Like there is the limit. Like you need to find a real balance between front and rear. And I felt every single time I had the same front and rear shock pistons, my car was super easy, but it was slow. Like it didn't have enough corner speed to like really get into it and go on power, like early on power. Like it was pushing quite quite a lot.
It could work to where the difference in piston is like one end of the car has a 5-hole piston and the other end has an 8-hole piston. But again, I am able to convince myself that you should put the 5 holes in the front, and then I'm able to convince myself that the 5 holes would be better in the rear. I don't know which is right, but it could work. Like that's something that I would try. It could it might
So
be
trying
that
like a
need I
614 in the front, for example, or
I would go
515
like 5, like
and
5 1.5, let's say. You run a 5 1.5 in the front, and then you run 8 1.3 in the back, or 1.4s even you run, but maybe 1.3s. So you try that, or then you do it the other way. So you have 8 1.3 in the front, or 8 1.2 in the front, and then rear is 5 1.5,
it's
because
either one or the other.
that will change the balance of the car. Because it's all, see, this is something that, this is the art of setup. What you are really doing with setup is adjusting the time at which different things occur. And that's what you do as a driver also. So when you have a car that's working perfectly for you, you are just driving and everything's perfect. Then when it's not perfect, you are adapting as a driver. So you are turning less in to the corner and then turning more, or you are getting on the gas later or less, or you are doing something to adjust your driving to fit the car.
For sure.
And the reason you do that is that the car always basically does the same thing. So when you go in the corner, the weight moves to the outside, the car rolls. When you turn, the weight is transferred. All of these same things are happening. It's just that they are happening at different times. So when you adjust the pistons like this, you can make it so the load will transfer on the rear end first. The rear end will roll first. The rear will do something faster than the front end. You see what I mean?
Sense. It makes sense because what I noticed this year is like, at least on the table, I like to have the front end pretty soft and the rear end pretty thick. So
Okay,
that would
so
make sense going maybe in that direction. Like, I don't know if it,
yeah,
I mean, if it fits my driving style, maybe. But you know, when I first ran in Padova with Ricky, he ran that setup also. Like his car felt pretty soft in the front and pretty thick in the back. So I felt like, okay, the car requires that, or maybe it's my driving style. But Ricky was using the exact same feeling on the track, actually, on
so
the
I think
like on the car.
what that means is that when you run the front end soft, so the suspension is soft and maybe sway bar too, like you said, what it means is that instead of the sort of load transferring on the car quickly and the car turning quick and being responsive, the car will first roll. So it gives you more time with the car still being, the front end being neutral. So first it's soft, it rolls, and then load will begin to transfer more. So it's like that softness gives you time, or gives the car time and gives you time to react. But then the rear end is faster in everything it does. So the rear end, the load will transfer, the rear end will start sliding or doing whatever it wants to do in that situation. You see what I mean? So you are adjusting.
Totally.
And that's what I was trying to say with the piston. So when you run fewer holes and bigger holes, that it has less pack. So you need to run thicker oil. So then you're running thick oil, few holes, big holes. It slows the movement of the suspension down. When you run many holes, you run smaller holes, and you run a thin oil, because high speed, it has more pack. So you can run the suspension kind of plush and soft. So this is where it gets complicated, because the softness can be a sort of fast softness, or it can be a slow softness. That's what the damping is doing.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? So
Yeah, totally.
it's not enough what we just explained, where it's like soft and it takes time to roll. You adjust that with the piston and the oil. That time it takes to roll, because you're allowing it to roll. Does it happen fast with many holes and a soft damping, or does it happen slowly with fewer holes and thick damping? See? So maybe we just convinced ourselves that 5 holes should be in the front.
I don't know. Every single time I tried 5 holes, it's like, I mean, I tested only on the e-buggy this year. I mean, obviously it was a like special season, but every time I tried 5 holes, I feel the car is super easy to drive. Always, like, you have that kind of forgiveness, but it's never fast. But it's the combination. It's always the combination front and rear. I agree with you. I never tried like going 5 holes in the front and 8 holes in the back, for example.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
The thing is, though, all these things you try, you have to let me know if they work and how they work. That's the deal.
Of course.
Because I want to learn. I want to learn this shit. Okay, so then roll centers, the upper links. This is a bit tricky. I think the more you learn about upper links, the more unsure you are about what the hell you should run. On a KYOSHO for you, I mean, where's the front link? Oh yeah, they changed it now. It has just a link.
Higher
I would assume
in the front, lower inner in the back.
I would assume that for you, yes, middle or top on the front, because you want it to be smooth in. Okay, that's it. Mm-hmm. Rear, this is where it gets interesting.
I tried lower inner and lower outer, and it was not consistent sliding. It was like feeling like you had grip, and then mid corner I was losing everything. That's what usually is using. Inner and outer lower.
Or both. Okay.
Yeah, both. And it was not feeling like super good, but maybe giving the outer upper and going lower for the inner.
So generally I would say that you would want this in the top hole.
In the back?
In my opinion. Yeah. Middle or top? For you. This is for you, for what you want.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a bit of a thing here where if you are running, let's say, a 2.7 rear sway bar and your shocks are stood up, okay, then maybe the top hole is best. But then with that setup, if you went down, maybe like you said, you lose the rear end, it's not good. But maybe when you have it down here on the tower, the link down on the tower, maybe if you go to a 2.5 rear sway bar and lay down your shock, maybe it would be better. So it's the rear link, I think, is a bit of a combination thing. So you don't only change that, you change other things.
That's why I love those cars, like having 3 holes. It's like you just put the middle one, and it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, right. Because you're like, top hole's not good. Yeah. I mean, lower, no. Middle is best. It's like the key to car design. You have one hole that's good, then you put one hole either side.
Yeah.
Right?
Easy.
That's how I design my car. No.
Perfect.
No, it's not. It's not like that. But that's what I would try if I was you.
That's good ideas. I mean, as soon as we can go out of that lockdown mode, that's for sure a few things I would try. Of course,
on the rear hub. Basically, rear hub, this is where I would run it. So top, long for the link. Wheelbase, what about that? You run the rear hub towards the rear?
Almost. I have like 2 mil behind. Yeah, 2 mil behind, 3 mil in front of it.
Let's take a look at your car. Last thing. Let's look at your car. Is there anything sort of we need to see there?
Or nothing special, actually.
We get some ideas.
Nothing special.
Get that body off. Let's check the setup.
You want some nudes?
Send nudes. I thought of something immediately. Do you use weights on the
Yeah,
chassis?
20 grams in the front of the chassis.
I never. I've tried it, but I just don't get it. So I don't use them. But
For me, I like 20 grams in the front because the front is lifting a bit less on power.
yeah,
So it keeps the front end a little bit more into the track when you go on power, less like nose up.
yeah. What are those springs? These are new MP10 springs.
The gray ones are like the ones from the MP9, I guess. They are stuck in the MP10, and
Okay,
red
so those are
rears,
pretty.
yeah, pretty standard.
They,
And the red rears are the new standard. They are 1.5 coils. It's the new standard for the MP10.
MP9 was 1.4, I think.
Yes, like same as the gray fronts. The gray fronts are 1.4, and red rears are 1.5.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any more ideas than that for now. But I think those things,
That's already quite some good ideas
those
there.
those things would be interesting for sure. But I'm not saying that it will be as good as when you have balls in your life.
But like I said, I'm a different driver now, so I'm pretty sure that even if I had pivot balls, I wouldn't be that good, you know, because I'm more than 10 years older. But I'm sure that I'm a better driver now. I have more experience, and it's like I know more about the setup now that I knew back in the days for sure. And I've seen I didn't do many races this year. From my own experience, you can practice as much as you can, but you're not learning as much as when you're racing. So for sure, I've been doing a lot of testing days, practicing, getting everything dialed. But I'm really looking forward to 2021 to like go back to racing and learn even more. I know that I've done a lot of work already, but I can't wait to go back on the track, race more, and learn because I know that car has a lot of potential, and I'm sure together we can do some big things.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna be completely honest. My conclusion is that it's not really that you need balls in your life. I mean,
Thanks.
it's such a good running joke that I I don't know if I'm gonna give up on it. But the thing is, you don't really need the balls, and this is the thing that has annoyed me also, because most companies they just copy. They have no fucking idea what's actually going on and what makes a car work. Mugen wins the world. Everyone needs balls, and suddenly people make pivot ball cars. Oh, Associated one with a pivot ball. Yeah, this is definitely the right direction. Everyone makes pivot balls. Back when KYOSHO was winning everything, it was all about C-Hub. So it kind of goes, it ebbs and flows. It's one or the other. And no one really takes the time to understand, like, hey, what's actually going on? So I don't think you need the balls. That's not what you need. You need certain things from the car. And you can achieve them with a C-Hub car by just changing some geometry. And that's up to the car designer to do that. But the point I want to get across is that the important thing about how cars handle is the design itself, what the design allows the driver to adjust, and then the driver selecting the correct adjustments for the way they want the car to handle and the way they drive. So the KYOSHO it's a proven sort of platform over the decades. And by working with the MP10 and developing it further, maybe adding some adjustments you don't currently have, I'm sure you can get it to handle the way you want without adding balls. I know I just said it. Fuck.
You said
But
it.
I have to be honest.
It's Christmas before Christmas.
Yeah, I just have to be honest. Well, there is one thing. Maybe
No,
the
I truly
balls.
agree with you. Like when you have a car that is designed and you have guys working on pretty much the same platform for more than 10 years is more important. That's why I wanted to run for KYOSHO for such a long time. It's not about pivot balls or C hub or anything. It's just about the confidence and the trust and the the way it was driven to what it is now. It's like it's not like we're gonna do a revolution. Like we changed the whole car from one to another. It's like the basic is here, everything is proven, and then it's just small steps that they're moving forward and forward and forward. If you look at the KYOSHO now compared to the KYOSHO 15 years ago, it's not just small adjustments, and it just follows what the track needs, what the driver needs, and that's also why I wanted to drive KYOSHO that much.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that people tend to do is, so when the MP9 came out, it was a big change from the 7.5. So people liked the 7.5. MP9 came out, people are, oh, this sucks. It's no good. And then look, after I think the second year of the MP9, it became universally seen as the best car on the market for the next 4 years or so, at least. And even until the MP10 came out, it was still one of the best, and on some tracks the best. Now the MP10 came out, same thing again. Oh, it sucks. It's no good. But again, over the next few years, it will be developed into one of the best cars for sure, and maybe the best car on some tracks. Like that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think
That's
it
what
was released early January 2019, so the car is just a year and a half old. You know, it's just a new
yeah.
platform.
When you make a bigger change like that, it will for sure take some time for all the drivers to get used to it, find the settings they like, and for everyone to sort of test it in all different conditions to gather the knowledge to be like, okay, we need to tweak these things and those things, and okay, then it becomes that great car. The only way to then make a bigger step forward is to make a bigger change. And when you make a bigger change, you are taking, sometimes you take a sort of slight step back in some aspects, but allowing yourself more room to then go further than you could before. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And so my point here was that I think, even though we are doing this ranking video with Keenan, and even though I still think that you're done, because it's this moment. We are talking about this moment in time. And in this moment in time, you're done as a racer. Unless you and Kanai and Craddock and whoever else is working there can figure out what the tweaks to the setup are that you need, what the sort of new option parts and whatever else you can create that will help you drive the way you naturally want to drive. Unless you do that, you're done. And you don't need balls.
You're gonna make it happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for your time. This was interesting.
Yeah, it was super interesting.
Just remember, I didn't do this video or give you this advice because I like you. I still think you're an asshole. Okay. I did this for selfish reasons.
I think you're an asshole too, but we have a lot in common.
Yeah, we are both assholes. Speak our minds. That's good. That's a good thing. So I did this for selfish reasons. I want to learn about car design. I want to see what you like and if you can make a C-Hub work for you. Don't get the wrong impression.
No problem.
Okay.
I won't disappoint you.
Okay, now go for yourself. I'm done. Any last words?
No, thank you for being part of the show. I hope we can play more next year, and I will show off what's the old dude that is done is able to do.
See ya.
See you, buddy.
Boom. So there you had it. We had a long talk with Renaud Savoya, and I think I came up with some decent ideas for him to try on the KYOSHO and see how it goes. So I'm curious to see, maybe after he's tried them, we have to do another video where we discuss the changes and what he thought they did. I'm actually curious to know myself. And what else? Yeah, so if you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment below, all that sheesh. But also another thing, I was thinking while I was editing this that I could actually make a video and try to determine which is better, C-Hub or pillow ball. So go through all the positives and negatives and decide which is the better system. And yeah, do you want to see a video like that? Comment below. Otherwise, I think we're done here. Peace.